Mount Ararat is more than just a mountain. It's a legend, a mystery, a sacred place. Many have tried to climb it, but few have succeeded. This is our story of our attempt. We start our adventure with arrival at airport in Agri, a small city in eastern Turkey. On our arrival, we were greeted by our guide Olan, who helped us with our luggage and then drove us to the town of Dubaziat, which is the nearest town to Mount Ararat. During the drive, which took about an hour, Olan, who surprisingly had a very good English, was eager to talk and shared quite a few stories and facts about the region and the Mount Ararat, which is actually a volcanic massif with two peaks, Great Ararat and Little Ararat. Great Ararat is the highest point in Turkey and Armenian highlands, with an elevation of 5,137 meters, and Little Ararat stands at 3,896 meters. Also, Great Ararat is one of the volcanic 7-second summits, which are the second highest volcanoes on each continent, and the last eruption of Mount Ararat was in 1840. But there are still some fumaroles and hot springs on the slopes of the mountain. Mount Ararat is also sacred to Armenians, who believe themselves to be the first race of humans to appear in the world after the Great Flood, and is featured prominently in Armenian literature and art. Upon arrival to Dubaziat, we checked into the hotel and opted in for a bit of a rest before catching up with Olan for dinner later that evening. Dubaziat is a small town surrounded by barren hills, with a view of the Mount Ararat in the distance. After a few hours of rest, we were picked up by Olan and taken to a beautiful local restaurant with amazing views of the mountain for a traditional Turkish dinner. During the dinner, we received a short briefing about the climb and the next day's plan. We also were introduced to our cook and the porters who would accompany us to the mountain. After the dinner and another educational conversation with Olan, we got back to the hotel and settled in for the night. The next day we woke up early, had a quick breakfast at the hotel and got picked up by Olan. We got into the minibus and headed off to the foothills of the mountain. Our starting point was Sevirmi village at the elevation of 2,200 meters, where we met our horses and porters. We got our luggage and food loaded onto the horses and we were on our way to Camp 1, located at an elevation of 3,200 meters. On the way to Camp 1, as we walked up steep and rocky trail, we passed by some shepherds' huts and saw sheep grazing on grassy slopes. As we made our way up, we had a sunny and clear weather and could see the snow-capped peaks of Great Ararat and Little Ararat looming above us. After about 4 to 5 hours of hiking, we finally reached Camp 1, where we had hot drinks and small snacks waiting for us.
So, we made it to Camp 1. Well, what a hike. You can see the Mount Ararat at the top behind me, and I can say that's, I did not expect the challenge that it was. The hike is from about 2,000 to 3,200, so about 1.2k up. I don't know, it took about 4.5 hours with a couple of stops, but I can tell you the lack of oxygen does kill you, and that's the hardest thing. I've got my headache. That's my first mountain. The head is pumping, but it is what it is. I'm gonna have something to eat, grab some, something to drink, take a couple of Panadols, lie down, and hopefully tomorrow we'll go to acclimatization walk and probably back here or we'll stay in the Camp 2.
The campsite was on a relatively flat area, surrounded by rocks and a spectacular view of the mountain. We settled into our tents for some rest, feeling the effects of the altitude. In the evening, our cook made us a delicious dinner, which we thoroughly enjoyed, while talking about the plans for the next day. And then we headed off for the nights back to our tents. The next day we woke up around 8 a.m., still feeling the effects of the altitude and the lack of oxygen. We had a quick breakfast, packed our lunch, and started our acclimatization hike to 4,200 meters. This day was an important one to help our bodies to adapt to high altitude and low oxygen levels. The hike was a bit challenging as we went up through rocky terrain mixed with snow patches, and we definitely felt the effects of the thin air as we ascended higher. We took frequent breaks and drank plenty of water. Olin told us to walk slowly and steadily without rushing or overexerting ourselves. He also continued to impress us at each break with the history of Mount Ararat, which has been called by the name Ararat since the Middle Ages, as it began to be identified with the mountains of Ararat, described in the Bible as a resting place of Noah's Ark. However, some scholars argue that Genesis 8.4 does not actually refer specifically to Mount Ararat, but to a region in ancient Armenia. The first recorded efforts to reach Ararat summit were made in Middle Ages by Armenian, Kurdish and European explorers, but none of them succeeded. The first recorded ascent was made in 1829 by Friedrich Perret, a German naturalist, and Kachedun Abvoivian, an Armenian writer. Once we reached the altitude of 4,200 meters after about 3.5 hours of hiking, we had a break and admired the view. We could see the whole massif of Mount Ararat and the surrounding plains and hills. After the break, we were on our way back to Camp 1. The descent was much easier and faster than the ascent and took us half the time. Once we reached Camp 1, we rested for the rest of the day, contemplating the challenges ahead. The next morning we got up thinking about the day ahead. After a quick breakfast, we packed our luggage and loaded it onto the horses to be taken to Camp 2. Then we started our ascent to second camp, which is located at 4,200 meters. The hike took us about 5 hours and was much steeper, rockier and busier than previous days. There were a lot of people and horses making their way up to Camp 2, and we had to stop frequently to give way to the horses. The weather was on our side, even it was colder and windier than before, but it was still sunny with no rain in sight. The effects of higher altitude and low oxygen levels were also more severe, as we were more tired and breathless as we climbed higher. Olin encouraged us and reminded us to drink water and snack frequently. He also continued to impress us with his extensive knowledge of facts about Mount Ararat, which is home to some rare animals such as Caucasian leopard, the Bezer ibex, the brown bear, and the Caspian snowcock. Some people also claim to have seen Bigfoot-like creatures on the mountain, which they call Ararat anomaly. We finally reached Camp 2 around 2 p.m. We pitched our tents, had lunch, and relaxed in preparation for the final push to summit later that night. From the campsite we could see the summit of Great Ararat clearly. It looked majestic and imposing, but also inviting and tempting. That evening we had a dinner early to give us time for a nap before starting our summit hike just after midnight. Olin gave us some final instructions and tips for the climb. We had to wear warm clothes, gloves, hats, headlamps and crampons. We had to carry snacks, thermoses with hot tea and water bottles with electrolytes. We had to follow Olin closely and not to wander off during ascent. We had to keep an eye out for signs of altitude sickness such as headache, nausea, dizziness or confusion. Around 8 p.m. that evening we went for the final rest before the summit, hoping for a good weather and a good luck. We got up just after midnight. This was the day where we're going to make it or fail miserably. We had hot tea with some snacks and ran final checks on our equipment. It was time for our final climb. We started climbing to the summit of Ararat with Olin leading the way. It was dark and cold, and we could only see the beams of our headlamps in front of us and the stars above us. The final ascent trail was steep and icy, and we had to cross some snow fields with rocky ridges. We walked slowly and steadily without stopping or talking much. We were focused on our breathing and our steps. After about 3 hours of walking, we reached an altitude of 4,900 meters, where the sun began to rise. We saw the light of a new day over the horizon, with orange and pink colors painting the sky. It was a stunning sight that gave us energy and motivation. We continued our ascent, feeling more confident and excited. We could see the summit getting closer and closer, and we were meeting more and more climbers heading to the summit. After about 2 more hours of hiking, we finally reached the summit of Mount Ararat at 5,137 meters. We were exhausted, but we did it. We were on top of Turkey. We felt a mix of emotion: joy, pride, relief, gratitude. We hugged and congratulated each other. We took photos and videos of the amazing view. We could see the whole massif of Mount Ararat and the surrounding countries: Turkey, Armenia, Iran, Azerbaijan. We could also see some lakes, rivers, villages, and cities in the distance. It was an amazing panorama that we will never forget. We stayed on the summit for about 15 minutes before heading down. We knew that going down would be easier than going up, but we still had to be careful and alert. We followed Olan's footsteps and instructions. We used our crampons and walking poles to help us with traction and balance. About 3 hours later, we reached back to Camp 2, where we had hot tea and some snacks, followed by about an hour of rest. We had to rush down as the clouds were coming in, and the rain would make the descent to Camp 1 a lot more challenging. So we packed our gear and headed down to Camp 1. The descent from Camp 2 to Camp 1 was much easier than the descent from the summit. We finally took off our crampons and moved down quickly. We walked through grassy slopes and rocky paths, pushing hard to get down to Camp 1 as the rain started to set in. We felt happy and satisfied with ourselves for completing the hardest part of our climb, but still knowing that the weather was the main obstacle standing in front of us. About 3 hours later, we made it to Camp 1, just as the heavens opened up and it poured down with rain. We rested and waited for the rain to ease, before heading down to Serimi village, where our ride back to Dubaziat was waiting for us. The descent from Camp 1 was relatively easy. We hiked through dirt roads and pastures, feeling relaxed and relieved that we had finished the climb safely. The final descent took about 3 hours, and it was such a relief to see our ride waiting for us as we made our way off the mountain. After about an hour of driving, we got back to Dubaziat, checked in into the same hotel as before, and after a quick shower and change of clothes, headed out for dinner with Olan to celebrate our achievement and reflect on what was one of the most amazing experiences. What an amazing experience! And we made it to the top of Turkey. So, if you enjoyed the video, give us a like, subscribe, check out our blog, the link will be in the description, and maybe you can join us on our next adventure. Thanks for watching and happy travel!